Is this thing working? Yes. Yes, it is. Okay. So it's actually an interesting story. Recently, I'm no longer with McKesson because we're not interested in each other anymore, but that's okay. I had a very long career there and learned a lot. I was there for over 20 years. And today, we're going to talk about some lessons and stuff that we did there to help our planning and forecasting. Most people know this as road mapping, right? And for many products that you release, we need a year-long roadmap, or we need a quarter-long roadmap, or if you're a newer web-based, it might be as short as a quarter, it might be as short as 2 weeks. It kind of depends. But everybody always wants to do this. The context or the problem that we're going to describe, we're going to talk a little bit about the story and the problem. We're going to talk a little bit about, kind of the solution. And this was designed for a longer segment, so the details I'm going to go through pretty quickly because it's the ideas that matter. The details are more about the context, and yours will be different. And so, I can give you some ideas in that area, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's talk a little bit about the story. This is a requirement. When is it going to get done, and how much is it going to cost? I've never been asked, and what quality is it going to be, by a business executive. They always want to know, when is it going to be done, and what's it going to cost? And I've made several runs at this problem over the past 20 years or so. And in general, it always ends up poor, to say the least. And the last 3 or 4 years, I've been developing a way that we did this. We started out with a Kanban system, and we derived from that. And then I've rolled it out to a couple of different businesses, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about one specific story, and where they started, and where they ended up, and what we did. So this is a larger business within McKesson. It's about a $150 million a year business. Their products are really expensive. In general, a $20 to $30 million implementation, and they're in some of the largest insurance companies in the United States. We're in all the top 5. I don't know if you know anything about the insurance company, but the top 10 cover almost all of you, right? And then there's everybody else. And these guys spend a lot of money on some interesting products that's called claims intelligence processing. And it's where they take their claims, they run them through these giant heuristic engines, and in those heuristic engines, it determines how much you should get, how much should be paid out to the doctors. And the rules are archaic and contract-based and all sorts of crazy stuff. And that product went through a technology refresh. And in that technology refresh, they did a lot of varieties of road mapping. And before I got there, a typical road mapping session was taking 6 weeks, several iterations. They were combining forecasting and road mapping together in a mess, and they never got it right. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit how over the course of the last year and a half or so, I helped them to disentangle that problem based upon some work that, and a couple of other things that I'd rolled out. But we'll focus on them a little bit. So let's talk about what a roadmap meeting, or what the series of roadmap meetings would look like. I've been in that meeting. Peter's might even been in that meeting before. So the typical meeting was very cantankerous, not collaborative. It's all about, well, we don't like this and you need to meet this date. Well, we can't meet that date. That's unreasonable for a wide variety of reasons. And, oh, well, we can't do this. The technical knowledge to do this. And so it's a lot of, technologists baffling with BS and product managers ignoring and just saying because we want, right? No real listening going on, but a lot of yelling going on. And then they go back, go do something better. So we go sit for 3 or 4 days, do a bunch more estimating, and you just need to cut it in half and do all these things. Then they'd come back and they'd argue some more. And eventually, somebody just make a decision, right? I mean, eventually this was all kind of a useless activity. And it was taking, gosh, these iterations would take anywhere from 6 weeks, right? So they couldn't afford to do them, right? That's a $100,000 investment eventually is what each time they'd have to develop one of these roadmaps. And over the course of this product, and it was, in this particular case, this product was supposed to be $5 million in 1 year, and it was $15 million in 3 years. and is where it ended up. But over the course of the product, they did this exercise. It got down to where they were doing this exercise once every 4 months for 6 weeks, spending $100,000 on it. They didn't understand why they were spending a bunch of money. So they were going way, way over budget in this case and in this and what have you. And so when I came in, you know, we had an end state. Where did we want to get to? Well, we wanted this to not take very long. We wanted it to not cost very much money. And we wanted to create collaboration. We wanted to create transparency and create some visibility around what we were getting. Okay, and so we had basically we wanted to be able to do a roadmap in a civil way. I mean, was the bottom line. And where we came to get that, or where we got to by the time we were done, and let me kind of come back over here and talk about what we. So we ended up with some interesting agreements with the business. They needed a solid roadmap for 1 quarter instead of 1 year, but they wanted to know a year in advance kind of what was going to happen. So, and what that agreement meant was they had the ability to communicate the quarterly roadmap out, and to their customers and to make planning around it and service engagements and interesting things like that. But for the year long, what they would do is do business planning about the activities they were going to do to start selling and some interesting things like that. And it turned into a rolling event, not a fiscal year event, meaning that you would plan 1 quarter in advance and 3 quarters after that and kind of give an idea, not here's what we're going to do at the end of the fiscal year. Here's what we're going to do at the end of the fiscal year. This activity started to occur every quarter. And one of the interesting things that we did was disconnect forecasting from planning. So understanding capability was one activity, right, which in most large corporations is fairly fixed. Your budget is pretty fixed. It doesn't change that often, which means your staffing which is your biggest part of your budget and your biggest part of your capability, it stays relatively fixed, right? So really, as your capability changes as you make process improvements and you make productivity improvements and things like that over the course of a year, and then you get one big chance at the beginning of every fiscal year to renegotiate that, and in most corporations in these economic times, it adjusts the way you don't want. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things. So capability as a forecast was something that didn't need to be redone continuously. Yet, in the old model, it was being redone because they were re-estimating stuff and reapplying, doing these great big, you know, resource maps and Gantt chart, and all sorts of crazy tools that were causing them problems. So that was one of the things that we did. And that's the idea that I'm trying to bring here, is this disconnection, right? Disconnect that capability from the forecasting or from the planning, right? So you have forecasting, what can we do? Planning, what would we like to deliver, right? Those two ideas, generally they're bound. Gives you all sorts of interesting benefits. We'll also talk about the mature systems you have to have underneath that in order to support it, things like data, so that you can understand your capability in a way that is meaningful. So let's contrast that, I guess, might be a good way. How many people, you're all fairly agile folks, so you're using story points, maybe, or, you know, levels of effort, story points. So how many people have story points per developer per month, or some other such metric that they use, right, that helps you to understand capability? How right is it, right? How does it work for you? Right. Probably better than a 300% error, right? Yeah. Right, because that was based upon actually, each engineer will work, you know, 1,500 hours a year, right? That's what it was based on. I mean, you know, and this thing's going to take 10 hours, therefore now we have 1,490 hours, you know, kind of those kinds of really gross things from years ago. So we changed that model a little bit. Where did we get to with them? Just I'll give you the punchline. They would develop a capacity model or a capability model in about 3 or 4 hours, so they'd know what their capability was. They'd update it and review it quarterly based upon risks and staffing changes, and that was the capability model. And they spent, you know, so on the capability model, they were spending about 20 hours a year, as opposed to hours and hours and days and days and days. And in the planning model, and we'll talk about the magic unit here in a minute, but in the planning model, since they had a capability, right, that was expressed in a unit that they could understand, so it's not hours or story points or anything, it was a unit that the product managers can understand, then planning became scenario planning and Mendoza line planning, right? So you go up, we're down to here, that's all we can do, what order do we want it in? So they got that down to, gosh, what was it? About a day and a half, a quarter, right? Ultimately, what it ended up was they were spending about $100,000 a quarter on planning, and it got down to about $20,000 a quarter on planning, just for those release level plannings and business level plannings. Quite an improvement, right? They were pretty happy with it. And but the other improvements that they got was that the developers and product managers and general managers would walk into a room and they'd start collaborating about what they could do, not what they couldn't do. Right? Oh, well, we can do this and we can do this. Because the notion of capability was off the table, so there was no go re-estimate and go do all this other stuff. It was, this is what we can do. You know, I know you don't like it. You never like what I can do. You know, you always want us to be better. I get that, but this is what we can do. And if you want to unrealistically plan your business around what we can't do, that would be your accountability, not ours. Because that was the other interesting thing that we did when we split this model. The developers were able to say, this is what we're capable of doing, and we will meet this, right? Because we're confident that we can meet this. And we're going to judge ourselves within this system around that. Do you agree or not? Right? And they say, well, we don't agree with the number, but we do agree with the fact that you should judge yourself on what you're capable of doing. Right? So it became this cognitive disconnect for a while until they went, well, since that is really what you can do, then I guess that's what you're going to judge yourself on. And we'll change, and we'll start to talk about how better you are and how much you're improving, not necessarily what you're capable of as far as that goes. So yay, they save, saving $80,000 a quarter, which they, can spend in a lot of different ways. So, so let's talk about a little bit about, maybe, really? The solution. Talked about this a little bit already, but let's go into some more details. We made this big disconnect of forecasting and planning. And it's the change management of this was one of the hardest things that we did. There was a huge risk to the organization as we made this disconnect because we did something that had never happened to product managers anymore. They were actually accountable for delivery of business value, and they couldn't go and beat up the engineers, right? So let me give you a story about that. So if I'm an engineer and I say that I can deliver 50 widgets this quarter, okay, and I deliver 50, somewhere between 48 and 55 widgets this quarter, and what gets delivered into the marketplace is unsatisfactory on that quarter's release, right? What kind of problem is that? Should you go beating up your engineers that they didn't deliver? Or should you, well, that's what tried to happen, right? Or should you ask your product managers, are you picking the right stuff and can we help you with your decision making to pick the right stuff, right? Can we create a collaboration about choosing the right stuff? And that's happened where they picked the wrong stuff and it got in the market and they went, oops, right? Several $1 million of that has actually happened. The other thing has happened also. We're going to build 50 widgets and we built 35. Oops, right? That creates a big problem. But clearly where in the system you might want to look for improvements, right? Not who you want to go beat up, right? And the interesting thing about this was the developers were like, yay, we know what we need to be accountable for, right? Because they're always complaining, well, we didn't get the right requirements, we didn't get right this. No, we got a set of requirements or a set of things that we need to deliver and a description of them, and the product manager said that was the right thing that we needed to deliver, and we delivered it, and it was wrong or it was right, and we delivered enough of them, and met our accountability. So in some ways, in a big corporation, it's don't look here because we're not the problem. And in other ways, it's, oh, well, we can improve upon that, but let's improve the rest of the system outside of it. Let's go improve their decision making. And it created a problem for the product managers because all of a sudden, they weren't picking the right stuff. right? So we build 50 widgets. One of them the customer wanted. The other 49 were like, what is this? And why do I have it in my hand? Because I can't use it. I don't want it. And I'm not going to pay for it, right? And they're still struggling with this, right? They're still going through rounds of how do you do good decision making and risk management for your decision making like that. And this disconnect caused that fundamental set of process improvements to start to happen within the product management organization, right? Because they went, oh, we're in charge of our own destiny. All we have to do is, figure out what we're supposed to build. Oh my God, we have to build the right stuff. Well, yeah, that's what you were hired for, right? But, I mean, show of hands, how many product managers actually have a way of understanding in a true way if they're the problem, if the developers are the problem as we deliver stuff into the business, right? Do they know this? Do they know that, or do they just say, oh, sorry, we just did, this great big thing that we had, you didn't deliver it, so we couldn't make any money with it, right? I mean, which story do you normally hear? Right? The second one, that's the story you normally hear. Oh, those damn developers, they just, excuse my French, they just didn't deliver what I asked them to deliver, right? So therefore I can't go to market, Or what happens if they said, oh, well, those developers, well, they developed the stuff I said I was, or they developed the stuff they said I wanted, B, they developed the quantity that they said they would deliver, and oh my goodness, it's on its face. Separate that disconnection, or make that disconnection. How come that's doing that? So, what's the unit, right? How do we get this mental model in the product managers so they feel comfortable that they're getting units that they care about? So, this is based upon a hierarchy of Kanban systems. And inside of that Kanban system, the product managers have a Kanban system that they work upon. And we flow through that things called features. And features are what we want to build. Not how we want to build it, not why we're building it, that's the business case, but what we want to build. And what we settled on in this organization is that those need to be sufficiently large, meaning sufficiently expensive, such that the product managers care about them. So let's contrast that with a user story. So generally, if you're flowing user stories and they're taking 5 or 6 days to get done, let's get real. That, in general, especially in an on-premise system, doesn't deliver enough value that the product manager cares, right? They can't see it. It's not going to be a sufficient enough change that they want to spend their time. And asking them to get engaged in that system, especially coming from a traditional organization, will create an environment to where they're going, why am I doing this? This is useless. I don't want to look at these things. I don't see any value. Right? Eventually they'll come away from that, but if you're starting them out, you got to be gentle with these people, right? And you have to get them to a scale that they understand. So, so the user stories were too small for us. So we needed to batch those user stories, right? User stories are batches of creations of artifacts that you put into source control to deliver. We needed to batch those user stories even to a bigger concept of what we were building for purposes of the market. We call them features, right? They're a little bit smaller. They cost anywhere from maybe $20,000 to $60,000, kind of in that range. Well, we know it's in that range. 95% of them are in that range. And when you build something that big, that's enough for them to go, look, oh, my goodness, we can actually deliver this. We can do something with it. We can look at it. It has value. We can put it in the customer's hands. They'll see the value in it. We can string these things together, so they can do all sorts of interesting. So that became the coin of the realm. So when we talk about capacity, we talk about this is how many features that we can build, right? When they talk about an initiative, this is how many features is it? How many features do I want to spend on it? Not is it decomposed and I know the features. It's like, oh, well, I can make $5 million on it. I only really want to spend $2.5 million on it. That's this many features, so I'm willing to spend that budget on it. Right? So it's economically driven, right? We really tie it back to the dollars of cost. I mean, another interesting thing that we do is the feature board, the whip on it is cost in flight, and it's a conlip. So cost in flight. Well, I mean, so we know that these features have this 95% range, right? And we basically take a 75% point and assign it, and just basically count and multiply it. right? And it's a really good estimate for how much cash flow, and it also, I mean, it relates to the budget, right? And so, but the interesting thing about that is until we did that, it didn't engage the general manager in understanding the board. And the moment that we said, we put a dollar sign and, $325,000 or what it was, he said, what's that? I said, well, if you look at all the stuff on this board, the cost of the flow out of your budget, when this will get done, it's going to subtract $325,000 from your budget. He said, oh, I get that. And then the other thing that he got was balance, right? We always talk about balancing capacity against demand. These guys understand that if their budget is flowing at a burn rate of $320,000 a month or whatever rate it is, and the work up there is going to take, in this case the work is about 6 weeks, so whatever that burn rate is for 6 weeks. If we go over that rate, then we're screwed, right? He gets that, right? And so it's about keep bringing it back to that story of economics for us, right, in these units. And is it perfect? No. It's a hell of a lot better than we had. Right? I mean, you think about missing by 300%, right? We'll tell the punchline about where that other group got to here in a minute. They didn't miss by 300% anymore. So that was our unit, right? About what we called. So the technical leads would go to a meeting about road mapping, and they'd say, hey, what do you have? Well, we're going to build you 50 features. This quarter, that's what you're going to get. And they're going to burn at this rate per month. And so that's what you have. And they'd say, great. OK, we want to work on these. We're working on this initiative. It has 15 left, so we're going to take that off the top. We want to start this one, and it's 5 features. And we want to start this one, and it's 20, and whatever else. And we'd like a little bit of slack because we don't really know what's going to happen in that 3rd month. So that's all we're going to plan. And beyond that, we're actually going to start some other stuff. And we know the burn rate, so we know approximately when it's going to be delivered. Right? So this whole idea of features is tied through everything. It's the accountability model. It's the when am I done model. It's the burn rate model. It's the prediction of the date done model. It's the cost model. It binds all of that together for us in a way that everybody understands. Right? The general manager can even understand what a feature is. Right? And that's where it's so built a lot of trust, lowered a lot of risk. Right? And what I mean by that is I found that developers were much more willing to give a realistic estimate of their capability than they were to give a realistic estimate of when something was going to get done. Right? They're much more in tune with that. And so that was very helpful. Then we backed it up with a bunch of data. Right? So it was, we gathered data off of our Kanban systems to help us out with that. All right? So, yes? So as Douglas Hubbard just said, 5 data points. We actually went for more than that. We actually went for about 10, right? I mean, I'm serious. I mean, I'm a big fan of Douglas Hubbard's and read his book a couple of times and knew that I didn't need much data. That was one thing we had going for us. The other thing is this is the 3rd time I'd implemented this with a group. So I had a really confidence in how much data I needed to help them to start to generate their model for capability. Now, their first model for capability that they generated was off by like 30%. Right? And they're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And then I reminded them that their first model for their project that they just built was woefully out of whack. Right? So 35% to 300% is not a bad improvement for 3 weeks worth of work. Right? So they did work for 3 weeks and then used that data to generate a model. Right? And they knew they were 35% off, right? And they were going to miss for that quarter. Actually, it was for a 6-month period, I think. They knew that about 3 weeks later, right? So I mean, it is a lesson of using data and feeding it back into your model and going, oh, what's going on? And can I make decisions? And do I know more? And what's my uncertainty now, right? So we've talked a little bit about this. As you explain these ideas, right, you have to use analogies to get the product managers to get it, And one of the analogies that we use is speed, right? How fast are we going? And I've shown this picture, I don't know to how many project managers, but, they really want to know, ultimately, how fast am I going and how far can I travel? right, is the analogies that we use, right? And ultimately, we apply that to, and what routes do you want to take through the city to get to wherever you're going? And this is about throughput. We've all called it throughput, but it's really speed. How many features per, time unit can we deliver? And then tack time. How often are they going to drop off so that they can plan their work, right? Am I going to have to be looking at 10 features a week? Am I have to be looking at one feature? Well, what am I going to have to be looking at, right? Helps them to start to understand how they plan their work. When am I going to look at things? When am I going to accept them? When am I going to? And it's not about when can they deliver them. It's when can they take time out of their schedules to look at this kind of work. So we use this a lot when we explain it to them, right? How fast can we go, right? Now, an interesting thing about this is, in my work, I use linear models and spreadsheets, right? Fairly simple models. That broke down the moment that this product encountered the early majority customers. It worked great through the early adopters, right? Because early adopters really only want an 80% solution so that they can build that into the rest of the way their solutions. When you get to the early majority, they really want this stuff to work, and they're starting to ask for a different set of features. So what am I really saying? As you transition, right, and this was a new product, a new business that I had stood up, this is one case, and I'll tell you about the second case, right, because the risk profiles are different. As you transition through your customer base, your risk profile changes dramatically from an internal risk set to an external risk set, right? And if you don't catch that, like I didn't, your models will break down. It's just kind of one of those warnings that you have to be very, very cognizant of. And if you talk to Troy, he'll tell you about the way that he models risks in there and their probabilities. And he asks interesting questions like that about where's it coming from and what stage are you in, to help him to understand the probabilities of those risks and to help you to kind of integrate those into the models. You have to take these kind of things into account, because that was the primary reason that we were off by so far on that first model with that secondary business. I failed to understand that what I was in was a mature product business, right? They had done a technology refresh, but they were going into a mature marketplace, and they were replacing their products. And I failed to understand the customer demand or the external risk that was against that schedule, which is much more variable than internal risk, was what we discovered. So be careful as you make these kind of forecasts. Use tools and evaluate risks appropriately. And so, that's the really figuring this out there's lots of tools, right? Starts with data, though. How many people have Kanban systems or systems that they gather data on? Okay, most everybody. How many people use keep your hands up. Okay, I'll add the people who use electronic tools. Yeah, okay, because you also gather data, huge amounts of data. And the problem is you probably have too much data. Because when we started this a few years ago, this was the data that we gathered to create some very advanced models. I wanted to know the day the card went through a start gate that we specified, the day the card went through the done gate that we specified, and the kind of work it was. That's all the data I gathered. And I just put it in a spreadsheet, right? And from there, you can get all sorts of interesting time, total lead time. How long this thing takes from beginning to end, because we happen to gate ourselves beginning to end. You can get a profile of the kind of demand that you have. And then you can start to use those you can use cycle time analytics to start to understand how you can deliver, the rates you can deliver, and all sorts of things like that. And while it's not perfect, it's a whole lot better than we've had, right? And interesting side note, I am a reformed story point estimator, because I did the same plot that, gosh, who was it yesterday that showed it? I don't remember. But it's trying to correlate story points to lead times, right? And there was none, or there was nothing that I could detect that was usable. So why is this important? Well, because story times don't relate to dates. Not at all. Lead times relate to dates, right? They're days and dates and end dates and all sorts of interesting things like that. So I latched on, well, wait a minute. It took me a little while, but dates are one of the questions that I'm being asked, right? And so that was really interesting with what we had. So now that we know our capacity, now we got to know where we're going. What routes do we want to take through the work that we're doing? And it became a fairly simple exercise of Mendoza line planning. Don't cross this line because that's more than we have. And scenario planning. Well, we'd like this one in this order, this one in this order, this one in this order. And you take a 6-week process and you reduce it to a one-day meeting with 4 people in the room going, yes, we're happy with the outcome. Right? Yes, we're collaborating. We have no stress. We're not re-estimating. We're not doing all these things. Right? Everybody says, well, it's not quite good. We want more, we want more, we want more. Okay. Great. How are you going to get more? Here's 5 options, right? You can spend more money here. You can do this. You can reduce this. You can not, you can choose not to maintain that product and move the capacity over here. Whatever you'd like to do, right? But we can tell you what the capacity is and what you'll get really quick. So, planning a route map, used to be the biggest problem. Now it's an exercise in, it really increased the joy of these people to work together, right? And it really created trust in a way that was fairly amazing to me. I have had a significant problem penetrating the product manager and helping them to become part of systems and use data and do all those interesting things till I was able to give them a clear way to understand the development organization that they had and use it in a way that was meaningful for their business, right? Those are that's what we really accomplished there, right? Understanding what they're capable of, but it was rendered in such a way that they understood it so that they could use it in a meaningful way to deliver business value, right? So the road mapping or the route mapping became a fairly simple, question of market demand, customer demand, whatever priorities and stuff they wanted to use to decide which initiatives they were working on, and then lay them down and get it done. Okay. Yeah. So at this point, we have 2 options, right? So I've talked about what the problem we had, pretty severe problem. We got to a really good, happy place. Talked a little bit about the ideas that I used. We can talk a little bit about the details, or we can have a dialogue about the idea. And which would you like to do? Show of hands. Would you like to have a dialogue? Or would you like to continue a little bit more into the details? Show of hands, details. Okay, show of hands, dialogue. Figures, it's a split. So from this point forward, open forum on questions, and we'll talk a little bit about, and I'll kind of go through the details to fill in the air. How's that? Does that work? Great. So lots of words because we have basically 3 views of this thing. We'll go through each view that we care about. So the general managers have initiatives that they want to work on. I need to deliver this big thing into the marketplace, right? And these big things are, because of the way the financials work in a large corporation that does capitalization of software, which is no fun, but what the IRS rules or what the McKesson rules ended up to being is that it has to be $250,000 to capitalize, and the president of the business unit could approve anything up to $1 million. Therefore, our initiatives were between $250,000 because we wanted to cap it, and $1 million because we didn't want to send it to John Hammergren. Right? A very practical range of what we wanted to do. And so they created these initiatives that are going to be inside of that range. And it also created much smaller batches to deliver into the market, right? $1 million worth of work is actually not that much work. I mean, when you're talking at the scales and products of what we're talking about. Especially $250,000 is not that much work. But it just automatically limited that batch size, and magically they were getting feedback that at a faster rate that they didn't really expect. I don't even really think they understand what they got. It doesn't really matter. They're using it, right? But their view was an initiative, right? And an initiative will be something like, we need to deliver into the marketplace durable medical equipment authorizations, right? Oh, by the way, that's the whole initiative. That's the whole description. That's what they would tell us. And from there, they would then say, because that would allow us to open up this kind of business for this kind of money, and therefore we want to spend this kind of money on it. Okay? Therefore, we know the estimate, right? They only want to spend $1 million. They only want to spend $250,000. We know how many features that is, right? Therefore, there's none of this breaking it down, estimate it, go through all this stuff. It's a business case driven. It's driven from that side. What do we want to spend on it? Not what is it capable of. Now, occasionally, what we wanted to spend on it was unrealistic, right? So then it becomes a negotiation, right? Oh, you need to spend a little more, right, type thing. So that was one, and that visibility was a book, right? Basically a spreadsheet and a report, not a big flow thing. Project manager's view, or product manager's view, was those initiatives decomposed into features, right? And it flowed, and it had an idea, it had a way that it worked. And yes.
Hey, Richard, can you speak a little bit about the scale of this? How many initiatives and how many product managers?
So the scale in this organization is let's start from the bottom. 90 engineers fed by 10 or 12 product managers and business analysts type thing, right? So it's quite, and it's a product that's a platform with 6 or 7 manifestations of products on top of it. Okay, so it's not simple, but it's not. I mean, it's not like an airline system, but it's not super complex. Yeah. So does that help? Yep. Okay. Right. So they would flow all their features together, so they'd understand where they all are, and they'd swim lane them by initiative. And the product managers kind of ended up settling on, we'll work on 3 initiatives for this whole thing at any given time, right? And away they went. So that was Kanban board for them. So the product managers had their own Kanban board with their own work items that flowed at the rates that they dictated, where they were engaged in some of the work that happened on them. Now, there was a construct column in there, right? Get it done column. That was this view, the developer view, right? And so they would take these features and decompose them into stories. And that's what they would work on, right? And so we ended up creating a balanced system from a perspective of, we knew about how many stories each feature should have, and if it went over or under, it was okay, but if it went way over, we'd start to ask questions, because then that feature was probably too expensive, and some balances and checks and balances that we put in the system like that. So that was the details. So the biggest detail, the biggest takeaway from this is those 3 levels, right? Each level had their own work item, and they controlled their own system. They had policies in their own system. They worked within their own systems, right? They felt good about a system. So it wasn't trying to combine the developers and the product managers into a single system, which I've seen a lot of. And they believe their work is different. Yes? Oh yeah, they had column level, workstation. It was a classic Kanban. It was basically in this case, there's no testers, so it was code, review, done, or something like that. Yeah. No, right? It got WIP limited because the product manager said we would only work on 3 initiatives, right? But they would load a lot of initiatives up into that. Yes, Mary?